When I started photography when I was 11 years old, I had to use film cameras. So I had to pay every time I took a photo. And that got really expensive because I didn't have a lot of money at 11 and I didn't have a big allowance. But now we have digital cameras and we have cameras in our pockets through our cell phones. So I have some quick tips for how you can teach photography. And even if you don't know anything about the technical aspects of photography. And the first thing is what equipment you need, because I think that's a big question. Earlier, some of you were asking what kind of camera I use. So for a lot of these photos, I've of course used a bigger lens and a bigger camera. But for the photos in this slide, these were all taken with my cell phone camera. So I didn't need something special. And that's all you really need to teach any of these projects to your students is a basic digital camera. That's a point and shoot camera or a phone like this one. And that's all you need. And you can do it with a camera for each kid, or you could share cameras with groups of kids. And so in this case, just think about equipment as a very simple camera. Now, the biggest tip I can give you for teaching photography to young learners is to teach them how to hold their camera. Because the biggest issue I see with young learners is that their photos are shaky. Because, they're just so excited to be out in nature and to have this camera that they're holding the camera out like this and clicking. So teach students to hold the camera close to their face, to brace their arms against their body, and that helps stabilize the camera so that the camera will not shake and the images will not be blurry. So the other big tip I have before we get into some specific ways to improve the photography of your students is to have fun. This is really a way to get your students creative. It's art, it's natural history learning. We're learning about all different aspects of the environment, and the camera is really just a tool to bridge that gap. So really, this is just about having fun. You shouldn't feel pressured to know all of the technical aspects of photography like aperture and shutter speed. So here are a few just really quick tips with some photo illustrations on how you can actually teach your students to take better photos. So focus on your subject. This is a really big one. Decide what your subject is and compose your image so that the subject is clear. So in this image, I don't really know what my subject is. Like, it's a beautiful beach, but what I was really interested in was that small boat on the beach. So I got closer to the boat and photographed it this way. And that really focuses me in on what I was trying to tell the audience, my viewers, about. I was trying to show them this boat. And so encourage your students to think about what they're trying to tell. What story are they trying to tell with their images? And to get in closer. So then the other tip is to look for different perspectives. Find a different perspective. Look up, look down. Don't just be content with looking at something straight on. So in this case, I crawled underneath mushrooms. In this case, I looked down at my feet. Also try to find a frame. Just like we put frames around photographs, we also can put elements in our photograph around the subject that we're trying to photograph. So in this case, I used the trees to frame the mountain. And in this case, I used this path to frame this woman. And it really draws your attention to the subject. The other one is using leading lines. So how can we use lines to lead us into the image? You could have a road going off into the distance, a fence leading up to a deer, or this boat pointing directly into the horizon. In this case, I use the palm frond to lead your eye into the parakeet. And this is, once again, you could really look at geometry and you could really tie this composition lesson in with other aspects of your learning. The other really fun one is to shoot at a subject's eye level. So, a lot of photographers will just photograph from above. They'll look down at a frog. What I do is look for a different way to show it. So I get down in the mud and crawl forward on my stomach and get right up in this frog's face very carefully so I don't disturb it, but so that I can actually show eye contact with the frog. So encourage your students to not limit their mobility. I mean, they can really get down on the ground. They can turn upside down to photograph the sky. They can get down and make eye contact with their subject, their little brother, their pet cat, or, a squirrel outside in their backyard. And then the final tip is to experiment. You know, really use digital photography and the wonders of digital photography and our ability to take as many photos as we want to get your kids to experiment. These young learners can take a photo of a flower from far away, or they can go straight in and get up close and look at the details. As Dave said earlier, I worked on this project called Nature's Best Photography Students for a couple of years that actually featured photography and writing by young learners. And the quality of their work was just absolutely amazing. They sent me photographs from their homes in Africa or in Vietnam or in Scotland. And I wanted to share this because you just never know what this experience in photography is going to lead to. You may inspire kids to take their interest to an entirely different level. My father always said that if we give kids the tools and encouragement they need, you never know what they're going to come up with. And I always look back to this experience editing this photo magazine because it really inspired me to keep doing what I do. I want to end this presentation before we take some questions with this final photo, which is a really important photo for me. This was a young girl who encountered this dead shark on the beach in Mauritius. And I watched for a long time as she was interacting with this shark. And I watched also as her mother came up and interacted with her interacting with the shark. And her mother made a lot of comments, where she said, oh, it's disgusting, it's a bad, get away from it. And of course, sharks are something we need to be careful with. But the experience of seeing this interaction really hit home to me that our attitudes and the things we say in front of our students, in front of young learners about nature are just as important as these active projects that we do. If we want to inspire environmental responsibility in young learners, we have to model our behavior towards nature in such a way that inspires this very clear, positive relationship. If you have an insect in your classroom or a spider in your classroom, which I'm sure some of you have had before, I've definitely had one in my kitchen, you can kill it and say it's disgusting and scream about it. And your students are going to see that. Or you can take it outside and release it and say, insects don't belong in our classroom, but they're incredible creatures that can be respected. And so I think that that's a really good example of how we can use our attitudes and what we say and do and how we interact with nature to influence the attitudes and the perspectives of our young learners. So thank you all so much for your time this morning, for your comments, for listening, for participating. And I'm now happy to take any questions you might have.